Welcome everyone to the second in a three-part series on responsible AI. The first in the series focused on facial recognition and is available to view on YouTube and through this Facebook page. Today's event will focus on intelligent toys and other AI-based technologies aimed at children. My name is Jessica Wyndham, and I direct the Scientific Responsibility, Human Rights and Law program here at AAAS. We're pleased to serve as host of this series and thank Hitachi for their sponsorship. It was over 10 years ago that Science magazine had an article on the ethical frontiers of robotics, where it mentioned child-minding robots with facilities for video game playing, conducting verbal quiz games, speech recognition, face recognition, and conversation. Fast forward 10 years, and Science Robotics is reporting research on improving social skills in children with autism spectrum disorder using a long-term in-home social robot. Today, we'll be discussing where the technology is now and where it's headed, and the ethical, legal, and human rights implications of the development and use of these technologies with children. Now to introduce our guests. First, I'm joined by Dr. Kirsten Dautenhahn, Professor and Canada 150 Research Chair in Intelligent Robotics at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, and Director of the Social and Intelligent Robotics Research Laboratory. Before joining the university, she led the development of the Casper robot, designed as a social companion for children with autism. She's an IEEE Fellow and author of over 300 peer-reviewed articles. We're also joined today by Dr. Alexa Koenig, Executive Director of the Human Rights Center at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. She teaches classes on human rights with a particular focus on the impact of emerging technologies on human rights practice. In the past year, she supervised a team of students who produced a memorandum for UNICEF, the United Nations Agency for Children. This was the first effort to catalog the ways in which AI-based technologies are being developed and deployed for children, at home, at school, and at play, and then explored the human rights implications. With that introduction, the format of the discussion will be an interview with our guests with time for questions from our audience. That's you. Please use the chat function to post your questions, including your name, and if you'd like, let us know where you're connecting from. So to get us started, I have a question for Kirsten. What is the range of AI-based technologies currently available to children as both intelligent toys, but more generally as AI-based technologies?
Well, often when you see AI, you actually don't see it. I mean, children are now used to sometimes more than might be healthy for them to play on their iPads, or they play on their either own cell phones or their parents' cell phones. There's a lot of AI in there. So AI is not necessarily a physically embodied robot, a toy that you can touch. But there is, of course, recently a lot of interest in these more physically embodied toys. And research has shown, indeed, that sometimes the physical form can afford types of interactions that can be really beneficial in an education or in a therapeutic context, because it's the physical form that provides more realism. And on the other hand, research also shows that these physically embodied systems have more authority. So children are more likely to engage with robots than other types of games.
Thank you. And what are the different types of AI technologies that are integral to the devices, the toys, the applications that you're talking about?
I mean, it's not different from other technology that is being used in computer games or in for voice-activated personal assistants, for example, like Alexa, or assistants that we have on our cell phones. When it comes to intelligent robotics toys, you also use a lot of speech technology, but also vision, and also other types of technology that has been developed for robots predominantly.
Thank you. And Alexa, based on the survey, the review that you and your students did on the breadth of AI-based technologies available to children currently, what did you see as any differences between these technologies and other generally smart toys?
I think one of the big promises that is being realized today is the chance for these toys to be very interactive with children and to be adapted towards the different beneficial social goals that people are trying to achieve, whether it's for helping the child emotionally regulate or to learn. There are a lot of contexts globally where it may be very difficult to get teachers or enough teachers for a particular community. There's been some positive indications that robots and smart toys can be very helpful for adapting to those very disparate special needs where there may not be the personal power to really adapt to each child. I think the groundbreaking work that's being done in emotional detection is both very positive and a little concerning at the same time from a human rights perspective. I think helping to identify how children are emotionally responding to some of these toys is a fascinating area of study. But at the same time, I think when they're being used for certain forms of surveillance, that's when from a human rights perspective, we might start to be a bit concerned.
Thank you, Alexa. So, Kirsten, thinking about both intelligent toys, but also other AI-based technologies aimed at children, where do you see these technologies going in the medium term? And what is really currently more Hollywood-esque or pie in the sky?
Well, I think one distinction maybe to make is that there is a big difference between people and between robots. There's very often the understanding that if you have these human-like toys or human-like robots, that they will also automatically have the general intelligence, but also the emotional intelligence that people have. So, for example, a few years ago, the My Friend Kyla toy came on the market, and it was actually blocked by Germany because it was classified as a surveillance tool. And there are really, really good reasons, because children are encouraged to interact with this robot, I would call it, as if it were a friend, a real friend. So, for example, they would be encouraged to tell secrets or to talk about how they feel. Now, through this technology, and given that it used that the information was being processed on some external servers that also other companies potentially have access to, or that people can hack into, this really creates this wrong illusion, or I would call it deception, that these systems are actually human-like. And we need to be really, really clear that robots are machines. They do not have empathy. They do not have compassion. They might tell you that they like you, but they actually don't.
Thank you. And so that's where we are not now, and yet people, as I understand you saying, believe that we may be with the technologies. Where do you see the technologies going from where they are now in the medium term? What are the next frontiers of development?
Shall I answer? I mean, from my perspective, there is a lot of discussion and a lot of interest in using toys, using robots in education and in therapy, but there's surprisingly few of these robots really out there. A lot of research, for example, has shown that different types of robots might help children with autism in their communication and interaction skills. But you would really, based on that research, you would really already expect thousands or even millions of these systems out there in the real world, helping children and their families and being used as tools by teachers. So I think it is still about the very high cost, which means this technology might not be affordable for most people. In fact, it might still be a kind of status symbol, maybe for some communities to have such a robot. There's also this whole issue of robustness and how complex do these systems need to be. So for me, one of the main challenges and questions is really, will this research, this very promising research and studies in the wild, will they translate into really making a difference to children's lives, not just in a selected number of countries, but ideally worldwide?
Well, thank you for that comment. We have a comment from one of our participants, Larissa Shulkin, who says that she's developed and run a high school course on AI in 2018 to 2019, and they're continuing to work on it this year. So that seems to be one way in which AI is being brought into the education curriculum at the high school level. But then we have a question not just about children currently with us, but next generations. And Kirsten, you mentioned how this is being deployed globally. Pradeep Chowdhury from India asks, is this technology good for future generations? Is it taking people away from real life? You were touching on that, Kirsten. Do you have anything more to add? And Alexa, what would you like to add?
Yes, I mean, I can maybe add that one of the concerns I have using intelligent toys in general, but also intelligent robots for children, is that children are in the phase, I mean, we are all lifelong learners and we develop during our whole life. But for a child to grow up, it's a very important period of their life. They're learning about themselves, about their emotions, about relationships, about how to control their emotions, how to make friends. So there's a lot of literature on the importance of play and interaction for the development of social cognition, social intelligence, and personality. Now, I'm not worried if children spend 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 hours a day in an educational or in a just fun context with these type of systems. But I'm more worried that they might be used in order to replace human contact and isolate them even further. And in this way, what I see is the danger that these future generations will become more robotic. They will, for example, learn that friendship doesn't mean that you have to work on it really, really hard and you also have to face disappointments. They might just learn, if you have a friend and you don't like it, just try to switch it off, which is what they learn with these robots. And so I am not worried about you and me, interacting with these toys or children for a certain period of time in very designated periods of time. I'm more worried that they might be misused as a replacement for human contact. And I'm really, really concerned about that.
Just to add on to that, there is that concept of human-centered AI and really making sure that as we develop these new technologies, that we're really thinking through the pro-social benefits that we want to achieve with those technologies. I think one of the challenges currently is that corporations and organizations that are creating these technologies have really been in the driver's seat around looking at what can be done and pushing the boundaries in really important ways and sometimes very thoughtful ways about what we can achieve with smart toys and intelligence robots. But I think what we also need to be bringing into the conversation is the idea of what educators should be doing and thinking about these things and what questions they should be asking, also parents, and then also governments. And I think that's a big part of this, is beginning to create frameworks that really do encourage the pro-social end of this, as opposed to the negative side. As we all know, technology, there's that famous maxim that it's neither good nor bad nor neutral. And I think the emotional side of this area is one really great example of that, where if we can help children, deal with emotional issues using robotics in ways that we may not have human capacity currently to do, there's arguably a benefit. But if we're using some of the newer technologies, like we're seeing in some parts of the world, to detect children's emotional responses, for example, in the classroom to different concepts, particularly in more authoritarian regimes, there's the concern that emotional detection and beginning to catalog how children are responding could be used in very detrimental ways. I also think that, if we think about smart toys, we're really talking about usually 3 different kind of nodes of interactions. You've got the toy itself, and I think there's a real need to look at how children interact with the toy and the trust and privacy issues that come with sharing secrets, as was already mentioned, with this object. The second being the transmission of that information to the corporate servers, so the vulnerabilities that potentially come from a privacy perspective. And then the third is where that data is stored, who has access to it. So for example, one of the concerns that we had in looking at this and where the technology could go was, what if a child, for example, one of the secrets they tell that toy is something around having been sexually abused by a authority figure in their life or a parent. Some toys are programmed now to begin to grapple with those issues by saying, that sounds like something you should tell a parent about or a grown-up about. But what if it's the grown-up that's causing harm? I think one concern is it's arguably putting the onus back on the child when they may not be at an age or stage of development where they can adequately manage that situation on their own. And a big unknown is what are the corporations' responsibilities if they receive that kind of data to potentially intervene.
Thank you, Alexa. This is relevant to a question that we received from Rashid Banihamad. Do the experts foresee a need for digital psychology where digital counseling is commonplace in our school system? Either of you.
I think one challenge that we're seeing out here, at least among tech circles, is that there are a lot of attempts to have technological solutions to psychological problems. And one challenge with that is that it's, if particularly our world is becoming more technologically oriented, and that's one of the things that may be contributing to a growing sense of isolation among some communities, then having more technologically based ways of dealing with that may be problematic, at least in the short term, by not providing that empathy that was already mentioned, and really working on the human side of these problems. So I do think that there are a lot of apps being developed right now to deal with psychology, and there is some promise in what's being developed, but I think we do need really multidisciplinary teams of researchers who are doing a good job of looking at the social science of where this is helpful and where it may not be.
Thank you. Kirsten, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, this is actually an area that I'm very interested in, and I completely agree with Alexa that we need a multidisciplinary team looking at it. And as far as I understand now, and I'm still learning about that application area, we also need to distinguish between robots that might be just tools to maybe give you advice or talk you through certain behavioral changes, as opposed to having conversations that require deep human understanding and empathy. And so for me, the solution would never just be that it is just the app or just the robot. It would be the app and the robot as a tool in the hands of a therapist or a counselor, for example.
Thank you. And Kirsten, I was wondering if you might take this opportunity to discuss some of the work that you do related to, as I understand it, the positive ways in which AI-based technologies can be used with children with autism in particular. And also the associated special protections that you need to be aware of because of the particularly vulnerable population with which you work.
Yeah, I have indeed working for more than 20 years now with children with autism, and which has now actually become a very popular area of research. I mean, something really to consider on a daily basis if you work with that population is what is the benefit and who has the benefits. As researchers, of course, we can go out, we can do studies, we can contact teachers, parents, and so on. But we really, on a daily basis, always have to ask us every single second in an experiment or a trial. We have to ask ourselves: Is the child benefiting from it? Even if a parent or a teacher has signed a consent form, it doesn't mean that the child has given assent to participate. So we always need to make sure to provide an environment where the child can relax, that is enjoyable, and where after the trial is ended, where the child gets something out of it, where it has a certain benefit. So that's an area where ethics goes beyond the complying with certain ethical guidelines and regulations and so on. Ethics is really how you do it, how you plan studies, how you conduct studies, how you interact with the participants, how you give them feedback, and not just the children, also other stakeholders involved, such as the teachers, parents, and so on. And my colleague here in Waterloo, Jennifer Boger, she's actually written recently quite an interesting article on ethical by design. And she and some of her collaborators are suggesting that you have to take ethics really from the moment when you plan a study. So before you even think about any ethics formal requirements, but you need to really, all the way through your study, you need to look at ethics and who is benefiting, how are they benefiting, and what do we need to do in order to make sure that the results of these studies are not just beneficial for the researchers involved and their careers, but also for all the other stakeholders involved.
And could you describe some of the benefits to children with autism that your research has been able to demonstrate?
Yeah, one of the strengths of having robots interacting with a child with autism is that you can simplify human-like communication and interaction. So in many of the humanoid robots that we used, for example, we used robots that had some human-like features like a head with eyes and a nose and a mouth, but very, very much simplified. And also the behavior of the robot was very much simplified, because children with autism struggle with the complexity and the speed and the multimodality of human-human interaction. So we simplified the scenarios to relax the children, to make them feel comfortable. And the other important factor is that robots are non-judgmental. We always presented the robot as a machine. We never gave the illusion that it is another small child, and we made sure that the children understood that. So children liked the robot, but they didn't feel judged by the robot. So for example, when they showed behavior that was maybe socially undesirable, for example hitting the robot in the face, no one got upset. If a child hits a person or another child, then of course, lots of things would suddenly happen in the classroom. But a child hitting this robot was then an opportunity for the teacher or for the therapist to then discuss the situation and to help the child understand about cause and effect, that his or her behavior caused the robot to show a certain reaction. So for me, the strength of working with robots, and generally I would say children with special needs, is that you can very much simplify interaction. You can always keep the human in the loop, the robot as a mediator. Other people are always part of the interaction, and in interacting with the robot is non-judgmental. And this is really, really difficult, because regardless how nice and friendly a parent or a teacher is to a child will know that whatever it does will be judged in one way or the other. But this is different from the more non-judgmental scenario you can create with a robot.
Thank you. There are two questions I'd like to try and cover before we wrap up at the end. Alexa, I'm interested to know what you learned through applying a human rights framework to AI-based technologies for children.
Great. There are a couple of different ways to think about what's emerging in the space from a human rights perspective. Probably the biggest human rights set of guidelines that currently exist are the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And they went into effect back in 1990. Unfortunately, the United States, as with many international conventions, is not a party to that particular convention, but 196 countries actually are. And what that convention basically provides are certain rights for children, including rights to privacy, rights to play, which is very important for learning and smart risk-taking, right to education, and the right to non-discrimination. So one of the things that we did in looking at smart toys in particular was kind of ran through the ways that each of those smart toys can really strengthen and or is in conflict or tension with some of those different rights. Certainly, I think as we're developing toys for the future, thinking about the right to non-discrimination and how we can provide greater equality in education, but also with regards to the right to play by making sure that these toys and these robots are set up and optimized for the needs of different constituencies around the globe. And within communities like the United States, for different subgroups within the US, is going to be important. I think as more and more facial recognition technologies and more biometric technologies get integrated into some of these toys, thinking about through kind of the data sets that are used to train these technologies and making sure that they equally consider the needs and the biologies of girls as well as boys, of children of different races and ethnicities, will be important for making sure that we all have equal access to the benefits of these new technologies and different goods. I think the privacy piece is also really important. And as we're looking at the human rights part, I think that's where most of the conversation has been. I think it's really important for parents to understand some of the privacy challenges that come up and how the privacy concerns of their children may really vary over that child's life course. The last thing I would say about the human rights perspective is one of the challenges of using a human rights legal framework to constrain some of the negative side and really maximize some of the benefits is that the human rights framework is really set up to provide guidance for states and not companies. And so as more and more companies are rolling out these products, I think it's going to be really important to look at supplemental guidelines like there are the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights that basically bootstrap what we tell states they need to be thinking about to maximize benefits to people within their borders. It puts some of the onus on corporations to incorporate some of that same thinking into how they develop employees. So their responsibilities under that particular set of guiding principles will be to prevent human rights problems, to address those problems, and to remedy them as they're discovered.
Thank you very much. And we've received some comments. There seems to be a thread, unsurprisingly, given the topic of this particular event, about education, that it's being addressed to some extent globally, and there are collaborations occurring across countries to pilot the ways in which AI can be introduced into the education system. With that, I recognize that we only have a few minutes left in this event. And I would like to give each of our interviewees the opportunity to make some final comments. And I wonder if, as you do so, you could mention in particular current oversight and accountability structures and opportunities you see for the general public or others interested from the science and technology communities for influencing those structures as they emerge. So with about a minute each, Kirsten, I'll start with you and then turn to you, Alexa.
I mean, there are, fortunately, and Alexa mentioned already some of those, so there are initiatives worldwide to also consider generally autonomous AI systems, so in the European, but also within IEEE, actually. I mean, we need certainly more of that. And also I've seen a comment also from the audience that this really also has to be addressed on a global scale. There's, I mean, companies who are selling these toys, they're multinational. I mean, they are selling to all over the world. So it doesn't help very much if just in one region or one country certain things are being developed. Some other comments, as a parent, it's sometimes difficult to also judge, shall I, children might be begging, oh, all my friends have this cool toy, can I please get that? And there is a temptation, clearly, to give in and maybe provide this toy. But sometimes we don't necessarily need toys. Sometimes it's also good to think about why do we actually want to give children AI toys, apart from an educational, say, or therapeutic purpose. But for entertainment purpose, you can as well do some other activities that do not involve AI, and that might be, from a developmental point of view, even more beneficial. And if parents do buy these systems, then, and I'm guilty here myself because I'm usually not reading any manuals, and when someone asked me for the terms and conditions, can you please click here, I just click. But we shouldn't really do that. And it's also a responsibility of the companies to make this more easier, rather than everything in tiny font size and you have to scroll and scroll through 50 pages. We need to also really make sure that parents are able to make informed decisions.
Thank you. Alexa, you've got a minute.
Okay, great. One other set of guidelines that I think are important to mention is the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, which is an act based here in the United States that, while it's US specific, is also set up to be a leader in some of the ways of approaching and thinking through the challenges that we're seeing. Right now, it's designed to help parents make decisions and governments make decisions around children under the age of 13. There have been some calls to expand the age range. In the international framework, we tend to think of children as under 18 years old. So I think that right now, that particular act is under review. There's an opportunity here to have really smart research that's multidisciplinary based research feeding into those legal frameworks as they go into their next iteration and are updated for the 21st century reality of how we're using toys for children. The last point I would mention is that, as was already mentioned, parents, I think, need better information, clearer information around the pros and cons of these different tools and opportunities. But I think it's got to be a partnership between governments, corporations, and teachers can all play a part in how we help parents understand kind of the future of smart toys.
Thank you. Well, I want to wrap up the discussion and thank both of our guests, Dr. Kirsten Dautenhahn and Dr. Alexa Koenig, and also our sponsor Hitachi for supporting this event. I hope that the audience will join us for our next and final in this series, which will take place on November 12 at the same time, 12 noon Eastern Time in the United States. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.